enforcement because the community is a fearful community sometimes, right? A lot of people who are immigrants in this community come from countries where law enforcement can force you to cooperate, right? And so there's a natural tendency in this community to invite them into your home, talk to them, and the next thing you know, they're coming back, they're talking to you and over again. It becomes a very stressful situation. So another reason, right? We're not telling people not to contact law enforcement, right? It's just the opposite. If we need law enforcement, they should respond to us professionally just like any other community. If there's threats against the masajid, if there's threats against our nonprofits, if there's threats against our shayuk, right? They should respond to us with the same degree of seriousness and professionalism as they do any other faith-based community, right? So if we have an emergency, if we need services, they should respond to us, and they should respond to us respectfully just like any other community. What we do need to do, and I'm sorry, I'm going on and on. We do need to do.
You've actually started answering the second question, which is, when is engagement with law enforcement strategic, and when does it legitimize harmful systems? Yeah. What is the line?
Right. So where the line is many of you may not know, there's a kind of a subgroup inside of law enforcement whose job, I hate to even say it, it's called JTTF. It's the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Their job is to investigate national security, right? And part of that job is that they are gathering intelligence, right, in the community. Meaning they're going to people, asking them questions, find out where they go to which masjid they go to, who else is going to the mosque, who prays there. These are all, in our opinion as an organization, these things violate the spirit, right, of the Constitution. Because what we found that did after 9/11 was it was actually stirring up fear in the community. And I know most of you who are around at that time remember, are you worried about people in the masajid? Are they spies? Are they working for the FBI? You don't know who to trust. It's causing people to feel like they can't freely express themselves on political issues, what's going on in the world. They can't protest. They can't do anything because they're afraid that, that someone may be working for the government. And so that's what got us involved in this project initially. And so those are the kinds of things we're trying to stop, because they don't do that to any other community. They don't. They're not doing it in the other faith-based communities. You don't see them going, when we have a shooter who's a white nationalist Christian, they don't go interviewing all the other Christians in town. And so to demand respect, you have to know your rights. And if they come to you, the way to stay out of this trap is to do what I just said before. I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present. These are magic words, and the FBI has to disengage at that point. They have to respect that. So a positive relationship with law enforcement would be if we want to meet with them, right? If we have a community concern, if we have an emergency and we want to call them, there's nothing wrong with going and meeting with the police. Go to their office, meet with them as community leaders, as people in the community. That is the way we build respect, right? When we have issues that we need to discuss, we go to them and we make our demands. We make them politely, professionally, just like any other community. And that builds respect. If they know that our community knows their rights, knows how to use them, and is also being proactive and good neighbors in the community, we build respectful relationships. So, Brother Mansour, you want to kind of?
Yeah, for the strategic portion, I guess it kind of just depends on the situation. I agree with John that, don't just invite anyone into the masjid, into your house. But then there's times where maybe you want to have like an iftar, right? And that is a strategic event that you can have. and you can kind of give information about all the good that you do in the community, and let them know you are a lawful member of this community, so that way it's on the record, it's known. But you don't have to go out of your way to say something or do something to fit in with law enforcement agencies, or try to attempt to bow down to whatever wishes they have, right?
So one really good way to remember a lot of the complex things that they mentioned is no chai for the FBI. What is it? Right, and someone can help us out with a rhyme for ice. Like, I don't know, no ice cream for ice. I don't know. But this segues into the next question, which is, how can we prepare for community leaders for crisis moments, raids, arrests, media attacks before they happen? But let me take a step back. I know here, especially, a lot of the questions were related to immigration, and really anybody that's not a U.S. citizen right now is very stressed out, very concerned. That's what our office sees a lot. So what's the advice if ICE shows up at the masjid? What's the advice if FBI shows up at the masjid? Walk us through that a little bit. Perhaps some lessons learned from the Epic City case study. So curious to hear your feedback.
Take that one up.
I'll start. So, and I think we ought to have a discussion at some point about if law enforcement or ICE shows up to your home, or if they're stopping you at the airports. We can talk about all these things. One of my pet peeves, my personal pet peeves, is, because I've seen it over and over again, is when law enforcement is conducting an investigation, showing up to a masajid or to an Islamic school or a nonprofit, a Muslim nonprofit, because there's this feeling that if I don't cooperate, I'm going to look like I've done something wrong, right? Because there is a certain fear, and it's human nature. I mean, it's not just in the Muslim community. People feel this way, and law enforcement knows it. They're trained how to interview people and how to get information. But I've seen it over and over and over again, and it doesn't do us any favors, because law enforcement does not respect us if we're not making them go through the proper channels, right? So, our advice is, if FBI or ICE is coming into the masajid, right? If they're coming into your business, your nonprofits, whatever it may be, then first of all, you need to determine the purpose of their visit, right? That means there needs to be someone who is knowledgeable in the masajid, who can communicate with them, why are you here and what's the purpose of this? If they come in and start wanting to question people, for example, everyone should understand that they have a right not to talk to them, right? If they come in and ask for documents or videos, sometimes we'll see if they come in and want to all the members that go to a particular masajid. We should not be just giving that information away outside of our constitutionally protected rights, right? So what that looks like is that if they come with a subpoena, right? If they come with a search warrant, in those situations, there's not a lot you can do, right? Then, if they come with a subpoena and they're saying, look, this, we're going to go through this legal process and we have a right to do all this, then sometimes we have to comply. If it's a search warrant, if they come with a search warrant to the masjid, there's nothing you can do at that point. That's a court order that's allowing them to search. But outside of some very limited circumstances, it's our advice, number one, if they come in and they're clearly conducting an investigation, unless we've called them, right? If we called them because we need help, that's a different story. We should be able to report when we are being harassed or crimes are being committed against the community. But if they're coming in doing an investigation, we need to do just like every other faith-based organization would do. You'd say, you know, I'm glad to cooperate, but I'm not gonna give you these documents unless you have a proper, warrant or a subpoena, right? Historically, we have seen too many times people don't understand they have these rights, and in order to appear to be, cooperative and to not appear like you're guilty of something, people just giving over all this valuable information, and it hurts the community, right? Because then the government, they get a list of everyone who's coming to the masjid, right? And guess what they're gonna do with that? They're gonna start interviewing those people and harassing those people for intelligence. So we don't want that to create this snowball. So the best thing to do is just be professional and assert your rights just like any other community would do. Brother Mansur, can you talk about if ICE were to come in?
Yeah, I think if ICE were to come in, right, it's the same situation. What is the purpose? You need to have a group of individuals or an attorney available at that point to communicate on your behalf, right? You can always assert your constitutional rights. Depending on the situation, ICE may continue to bother or ask additional questions. But again, it's just very, very simple. At this time we want to cooperate, but at this time, we would like our attorney to be present during this investigation or to answer any of your questions. All the attorneys, I think John has had this in his career. Recently, we were working on a case that had something similar where, an investigation occurs, right? Have a game plan on how you're going to deal with that investigation. Don't just assert anything. Don't just say anything. Don't have community members just talking about anything. Have the attorney come. Have them prepare. Have them determine if it's an actual subpoena. Is it an administrative subpoena? Is it a grand jury subpoena? What route are they taking? Is it a search warrant? Is it a valid search warrant? Is it signed by a judge?
Could we expand on warrants? We have two slides up right now, a judicial warrant and an immigration warrant. And so, first of all, if any of these agencies were to come to your home, on the street, in the masjid, what is a document that is legitimate and what is where you can assert your rights?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're seeing right here is two different warrants, right? On the left-hand side is a United States District Court warrant, and then on the right-hand side is one from the Department of Homeland Security. So let's start with the right-hand side one. It says on the very top, Department of Homeland Security. That's not a court. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's not a court. On the very bottom, it's circled where it says signature of, I believe it says an officer on the very bottom. That is not a judge that's signing that warrant. That is an immigration officer, right? These are visual clues that you can determine that this is just an administrative warrant. Now, ICE has this ability under their administrative and Title VIII powers to provide this type of warrant, but that doesn't mean you have to necessarily comply with it. On this one as well, if you go a little bit up, right in the middle, it specifically talks about removal and deportation, right? That's one of their enumerated powers. But again, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to have your attorney present. That is not a warrant that you need to abide by. Anytime someone comes knocking on the door and says that we have a warrant, right? If it's at your house, have them slide it underneath the door. If it's in your car, have them show them to you. You don't have to necessarily, pull down your full window to see it. The left-hand side is one from the United States District Court. You're gonna see on the very top that it says the District Court. It says search and seizure warrant right in the middle. It's also gonna have a date. It's also gonna state with an attachment of the persons and the people to be searched, the effects that are being searched, the property that's being searched, whatever is being seized will be listed in those attachments as well. You're gonna have a date, and if that date's actually current. Generally speaking, these search warrants are issued and then they're executed within 72 hours. In the federal courts, you'll see a lot of federal agencies execute them up to 14 days. On this one, on these United States District Court ones, you're going to see that the judge has actually signed the warrant, and that's very important, right? That is something that creates the validity of the warrant, and it makes it more specific.
I'm going to ask Brother Mansour to chime in on this. So we get a lot of questions about if ICE or immigration were to come to the home, right? And they say they have I guess an administrative warrant, right? What's the advice as to whether, does someone have to open the door? Did we have to allow them in? Do we have to cooperate with them?
No, absolutely not. You don't have to let them in. You don't have to answer any questions. It's very simple. You can, if they're at your door at your house, you can say, hey, slide the warrant under the door. I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. I want my lawyer to be present immediately. And if they're able to slide it under the door, you can check for those validity circles that we were talking about. Is it valid? Is it a removal warrant, or is it an actual search warrant from a judge, right? Always, always, always in those instances, you are allowed to invoke your Fifth Amendment right. You are allowed to remain silent. You are allowed to request your attorney to be present. And that's what I would say. I would say, I'm remaining silent. I want my attorney now. And if you're a U.S. citizen, then state that you're a U.S. citizen. I want my attorney now. I'm remaining silent. Don't state anything or admit to anything that could be conceived as a lie, because then they could pester you a little bit more. They want to get lies out of you. They want to, jumble your story a little bit, because that allows them to put additional federal charges on you.
And so this is a really good point. People often ask us, well, why should we just not cooperate with them? Why should we not just talk to them? The reason why is, number one, you do have these constitutional rights that you should be proud to exercise. What Brother Mansour brought up is there's a federal criminal statute that makes it a felony. You can face up to 5 years in prison for making a false statement to a federal agent. And so rather than getting into the situation where they're asking you personal questions, maybe they're asking you embarrassing questions, things that you may have done, when you were a teenager in another country, rather than getting into that situation where they're asking you embarrassing questions and you feeling like, hey, I'm just going to fudge it a little bit because I didn't do anything. It's been a long time. I don't want them getting into that. If you make a false statement and they can prove that it's false, you can go to prison, right? And then that's when they really can ratchet up the pressure on you to start making you cooperate with them in other ways that you don't want to do. And so there's really nothing to lose. In fact, there's everything to gain by invoking your rights. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to assert my rights to remain silent. I'm going to refuse to answer any further questions without an attorney. You can do it all very politely. Say, look, I'm glad to talk to you. If you feel like that you need to be polite, I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without my attorney being present. That protects you later on. Sometimes FBI agents hear it wrong, right? And they may say, well, you said X instead of Y. And they may say you lied to them. So rather than getting into all that, it's always best to assert your rights. And I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney being present.
So are there members of the Mariam Masjid board here? Okay, so one thing that CAIR is starting to do is train the trainer programs. So if there are key members of your community that are interested, what we're starting to do is host trainings related to developing a media strategy on how to get the message out in local news networks, newspapers, social media. The second is advice on government relations. Now, Fort Bend County, mashallah, there's a lot of really strong Muslim engagement happening, especially with members of this masjid. This masjid already has a head start, and I definitely recommend engaging those Muslim members that are, mashallah, moving the needle on policies. Next week, inshallah, we're hoping to have the resolution for Muslim Heritage Month passed by Fort Bend County. And so this is something that's being advanced by members of Mariam Islamic Center. And so that's the advocacy. So media relations, government relations, interfaith partnerships, that's something that we can train your masjid on. And then, of course, crisis management, how to respond, more in-depth training than, more beyond just remaining silent and calling your attorneys, a bit more details as well. Yes, I see the brother who's raising his hands. We're going to give priority to so the way we're doing these questions is that there were several questions and we've lumped them up into categories. So we suspect that this will be answering the questions of the community beforehand, but we will leave time for questions from the community. So there are many members of the community that are of an immigration status less than a US citizen. Green card holders, F1, H1, like worker. So how can the community, how can we, what is the question? Protect undocumented or mixed status families without exposing them to further risk? And I'll tell you this, I'll go to masajid, right, that have a large immigrant population, and I was like, hey, should we do a training for, what to do with ICE? And he's like, brother, these people are not going to show up at the masjid, because then they'll be afraid of being, labeled and targeted. So how do we get the information out there? How do we protect those that are most vulnerable in this time without exposing them to, further risk?
Yeah, so I think there's like a couple of things going on in that question, right? I think first it's important to understand what ICE is able to do depending on your legal status in the country. If you're a US citizen, ICE is not able to, under Title VIII, they are not able to ask questions of immigration outside of what is allowed to them in Title VIII. So you're not.
What is Title VIII?
Title VIII is the enumerated administrative power that they have to enforce immigration and determine citizenship. So they can't detain US citizens for civil immigration violations. They can't be required to ask, they can't require US citizens to ask or answer questions on immigration once you've kind of asserted the fact that you're a US citizen. And that's why it's very important that you specifically state that, am I a US citizen, am I detained, or am I free to leave? Because if you're free to leave, then leave in that situation. ICE, over the past year, has been involved in many task force settings, which involves other agencies as well, the FBI, the IRS, and others. So it allows the agencies as a whole to continue certain questions to determine how they want to lead their investigation. Again, the first step is always remaining silent, invoking your right to have your attorney present. If you are a lawful permanent resident, right, you're on a green card, you're required to have your green card on you. Right now, people are having, mixed thoughts of how they want to carry their green card. It's very difficult to get. I think they take for like 2-3 years to even send the green card out, right? So some people have photographs of it, some people have copies of it. The law requires you to have it. Depending on the situation, depending on the immigration officer, maybe they allow a copy to be sufficient for their examination. But you, as a lawful permanent resident, you still have your Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. You still have your right to be free from any unreasonable search and seizure. You still have your right to remain silent and remain safe from self-incrimination. If you're a non-immigrant visa holder, if you're, like the H-1B, the J-1s, that's when ICE has a little bit more latitude in asking questions and requiring you to show documentations. You still have your right to remain silent. you still can assert that you want your counsel to be present. And if you're in your house or even in your car, you can still state that that you're refusing entry. But they are able to investigate your immigration status at that point. And they are, able to determine, based off of their administrative powers, if there's reason to believe that you can be removed from the country or that you might be likely to escape. I think one of the questions was protecting everyone within the masajid or someone who's of lawful permanent resident or non-immigrant status. You're not trying to hide anyone. You're not trying to hide, you don't want to make it appear that you're hiding anyone. But this is when U.S. citizens should, step up and maybe be the ones that are facing the law enforcement officer. Maybe they're the ones asserting that, hey, you're breaking the law. You are affecting my Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, and allowing that to detract the officer from the situation. But don't be in a position where, they consider it as you attempting to hide certain immigrants in the community.
And I think it's important to highlight the fact that everyone who is here, if you are standing in this country, you have these rights to refuse to answer questions without an attorney. You have the right to remain silent. And so even if you're out of status, you have those rights. And so we encourage people to be educated about the questions that they should answer, the documents that they need to carry. Because at the end of the day, what you say to law enforcement can then be used later, of course, as you've all heard on TV, right? Whatever you say can be used against you. And a lot of times now they have, of course, they have body cams, the agents will write down notes about what was said. And so what you say could be used against you later on. So you need to be very careful about how you interact with law enforcement. And I'll just say this. I was reading, there was an investigative reporter who did an interview that I just happened to see a couple days ago. As of, I believe it was October of last year, ICE has illegally arrested and detained over 250 U.S. citizens. So there's a real problem with leadership, creating this atmosphere where anyone who appears to be the other, right, whether it's the Latino community, the African community, the Chinese community, the Muslim community, being profiled and being unjustly, detained and interrogated. And so if you encounter this kind of harassment, there's not much you can do while it's going on. We're encouraging everyone to be careful, to be respectful. If they attempt to detain you, even if it's illegal, don't push back. Don't put your hands on law enforcement. That's the wrong thing to do, because all of a sudden you're facing additional charges, right? So if they say you are under arrest or you're being detained, you need to comply, even though it's unjust. And then you get a hold of us and then we can help, right? Because then they violated the law and we can do something about it. What you can't do, and you should not do, is number one, run away, because we've seen that escalating, right? People being shot and running away. If you're in a car, you should be very careful, right? Make sure you put it in park. You see what they did to this woman in Minnesota. You just have to be very careful right now, because we're living in unusual times. The government is, in my opinion, violating the law and violating the Constitution per the atmosphere that's being generated from the president and our statewide elected officials. And so be very careful. Don't let it escalate. But just know your rights so that you can preserve those and not do anything that gets you into more trouble.
So this segues into the next question. It's clear that there's a federal agency right now that it's extending or using its authority, or rather wantonly. And just on my way here, I was contacted by CAIR Minnesota, that there were some members of their community, Somali community, that were detained by ICE, brought to Houston, released, and they weren't given their IDs, so they don't have a way back home. What levers of government or power, this was a topic of discussion today with City Council, what role should city officials play when federal agencies overstep, and how do we as advocates, as individuals, as communities, put pressure on cities to act?
Yeah, so I think, one, we live in this city, in our cities, and as was stated earlier, everybody who's working in a city capacity, a county capacity, in law enforcement, they are public servants to us, right? So in those instances, you do want to pressure your public officials to start pushing and figuring out what occurred in this and why the individual was moved from one state to another. This is becoming a common tactic over the past year. They are purposely attempting to arrest an individual in one state, moving them to a different state, mainly into Texas, Louisiana, Florida, because they know that those states will quickly be able to remove that individual from the country or to another detention facility. So it's just kind of important that immediately you go contact your public official to try to put pressure on the correct individual on determining where that your family member may be at, and attempt to try to retrieve them back, at least back to the state that they are supposed to be in, which is, in this case, Minnesota, right?
So I'm not going to be quite as polite about it. What I see is the federal government and our local police have been, in effect, kidnapping people. And I say that because we've seen at our protests here, right, police grabbing kids, mostly kids, right, who are out protesting, driving them miles away, and then letting them out in the middle of a bad neighborhood, right, or at a convenience store. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's not official policing, right? There's been no crime committed. They need to release you from where you're at and not take you somewhere else. What we've seen at a federal level is that ICE, in violation of court orders, right? So it's illegal, right? There's a court order in place, and a lot of judges now have standing orders across the country in federal court that if someone is, arrested, detained by ICE, that they're not to move them out of the jurisdiction without contacting the court and some days, passing so they have hearings on it, whatnot. ICE is still doing it. There's I guess it's Louisiana, right, is known as, they call it the black hole, because there's a bunch of private prisons there where ICE is putting people to remove them from their attorneys. Their attorneys don't have access to them, or it's very difficult. And they also have judges in some of these jurisdictions who are more likely to align with ICE's agenda, right? And we also have an appellate court in this part of the country, the Fifth Circuit, which is very conservative, and they're also more likely to align with what ICE is doing. So there's a reason they're bringing people here, and they're doing it in violation of court orders. What you can do to push back is, first of all, you need to reach out to an attorney, reach out to CAIR, and if it's a situation that falls within our mission, meaning it's a civil rights violation or you're being illegally detained, we have lawyers who are volunteering to help. And so you need to find a way to push back. I was just talking to a lawyer this week who had a client, it was picked up in Houston, put into, and immediately moved, despite a court order being in place from a Houston federal judge that they're not to move this person, moving them to Louisiana, right? And so this attorney knew what to do, got back in front of the judge. They dragged the DOJ and the U.S. attorneys and the attorneys for the ICE into court, and the judge ordered them all to get that person back, right? But you have to assert these things. You have to get attorneys to do it. Otherwise, people are disappearing. Families don't know where they're at. They don't know what's going on. And we've seen it, a lot of high-profile cases, right, where they've done this. So,
Mansoor, do you have anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
I want to open up the floor for questions. We have a few more questions, but I want to be mindful of the time and make sure that we hear the questions here for the people who took time out from their Saturday evenings. I saw this brother with his hand first, and then anyone on the sister side as well. But please go ahead, brother. Yeah, call CAIR Houston. We have an attorney for that.
you want to handle that part?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question for the people online is, if I am stopped by ICE, law enforcement, and there's some kind of discrimination happening, and I say, I don't want to speak without my attorney, and they say, okay, bring your attorney. First off, you can call anyone to be your attorney, but that is CAIR Houston's work. We have an attorney on our staff, and the service that we provide with the support that we get from the community is free pro bono services and representation when it comes to civil rights discrimination. Now, there's a murky line between sort of pure immigration cases and when there's some form of discrimination happening, but that's sort of the response. And I'll tell you my own origin story with CAIR is I was in my Islamic studies era, and an FBI agent, somehow got in contact with me through a masjid meeting, and they started inviting me to their office about some of my classmates. And I was just like, this sounds fishy. And I called Brother Mustafa Carroll, who was the director of CAIR at the time, and he said, Brother Imran, just tell them to go away. And I was like, really? Like, I can do that? He's like, yeah. So we have a lot of power in this country to not cooperate. And then if things like the brothers here have mentioned feel like you're feeling shaky about should I answer, err on the side of remaining silent and be happy to talk to them with an attorney present.
Brother, it's a good question you raised, because sometimes law enforcement will use this kind of line of questioning to trick you into talking. You don't have to have an attorney to assert your rights to remain silent. You don't have to have an attorney to say, I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney present. That fixes it. You don't have to have a lawyer on speed dial. You just have to know how to use these words, right? So you just say, I'm glad, I've done nothing wrong, I'm glad to talk to you, but I am not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present. If they say, who's your lawyer? This is an interview tactic, right? They're trying to get you to say, oh, well, I don't have a lawyer, I'll just talk to you, right? So don't fall for that. That's an interview technique. You just say, I'm not going to talk to you without a lawyer being present, and I'm going to, assert my rights to remain silent, and that's the end of it. If they start asking you these other questions, they're trying to bait you into giving them more information.
Yeah, and then I would just add one more thing is, as they start baiting you for more questions, again, invoke your right to remain silent, and then move along. I mean, they're going to keep asking questions. That's what they're trained to do, is to continue to bother you and ask you additional more questions. But just assert that you want a lawyer present and remain silent at that point.
One thing John has reported to me is in the Muslim community, even people who have attended Know Your Rights presentations will buckle out of kind of, under the pressure. And that those are moments to remember our deen, to remember the teachings of our religion, that fear is only due to Allah and Allah alone. We don't fear creation. And at the end of the day, whatever government agency it is, they're a creation of Allah, not the creator. So my encouragement to you all is you can know the information that we're presenting here, but it takes a certain level of grit, a certain spine to stand up for yourself. And it comes with knowledge, comes with knowing your rights, but also knowing not to be afraid and only to have fear of Allah and Allah alone.
And kind of piggybacking on that, the main thing is to not be fearful and not be ashamed to do this. Like, oh, I'm going to look guilty if I don't talk to them, right? I was involved in a criminal case once where there's an FBI investigation that involved one of the big mega churches in town. And even though this pastor likes to start his sermons every day with a joke, and he's a real happy, smiling guy, when they came to his church wanting to ask questions, first thing he did is what? Well, I'm glad to talk to you, but I'm not going to talk to you without my lawyers being present. And we'll cooperate with you. If you want, they were investigating a crime that had occurred involving the church. And the same thing, they would say, well, we'd like to talk to some of the people in the church and get some of their names and whatnot. And he said, well, I'm glad to help you do all that, but you need to come back with the proper paperwork, right? Because we have to protect our membership. Membership list of our religious institutions, of our nonprofits, these are all constitutionally protected things that we should cherish and be careful with. So just don't fall for these tactics. Be proud of your rights and understanding your rights. And you know what? They'll respect you. I was doing a roundtable with the special agent in charge of the FBI in Houston. And we started having this conversation. And after I said what I've just told you guys, he said, look, honestly, if my wife called me and said that one of my FBI agent was at the door and wanted to ask her questions, I would tell her, don't talk to them without a lawyer being present. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. You should be proud of this information.
I would just add one more thing, right? Is that just because you know you're right and you're asserting your right, that doesn't mean you're resisting law enforcement. The Constitution was created to force the government to follow the law. It's created to protect you, not to protect the government. The government has to do its job, and they have to follow the law. So asserting your right is your number one thing, and that's why we have it.
It's very inspiring to see the footage coming out of Minnesota about how communities are standing up, really, in a form of like nonviolent protest, asking quite sternly ICE to leave the premises. And so I think there's a request from the youth for a video to be presented about an incident that was reported by the Houston Chronicle of an ICE raid. And they've requested for your response to it and for the community to, I guess, react as well. At a grocery store? It looks like a grocery store. So one question that immediately emerges is, where can ICE enter into? Private businesses, religious institutions? Are there some no-go zones, and what are some zones where they have jurisdiction?
Yeah, so ICE will generally always go in public spaces. That's what we're seeing across the nation. You're going to see it across the news because that forum allows them to do a lot of questioning, a lot of interrogation, and a lot of utilizing a lot of bad tactics. in
Can you
policing.
define public spaces versus private?
Yeah,
Or-
public spaces is going to be like your sidewalks, the protest. You know, if you're in the city and there's protests, then they might be out there. Private spaces are going to be your houses, your vehicles, even private businesses. Businesses are private. You can tell ICE or other law enforcement to leave. The masjid is also, there are private areas in the masjid, and you can tell them to leave if you want them to leave. You know, like the imam's office can be a private area. Other, study areas can be private. If there is a public space, you can, they can make an argument that that public space is open for them, but you can still ask them to leave. In this particular video, I'm not sure if I think Alianza, that one of them was a U.S. citizen. Again, I would stick with your rights, invoking your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, asking for an attorney to be present, and I would allow, in those situations, if one person is a U.S. citizen and the other person has a lesser status, I would allow the U.S. citizen and hope that the U.S. citizen steps up and records the video, ask additional questions, make the job of law enforcement harder. And I think that's what we're seeing in Minnesota right now, is that you're seeing U.S. citizens step up and force immigration officers and law enforcement to abide by the law. And if not, we're catching them on video, and that's how it's being made public, right? I think, Minnesota has become kind of like ground zero on this whole incident. But they're learning from every city that they go to. I mean, from when they started in Portland to when they went to Boston, Los Angeles, Chicago, now Minneapolis. They're learning from their mistakes, and they're trying to take those tactics, make it more aggressive. This type of police brutality, which I would consider this police brutality at this point, because you have a civil immigration officer trying to conduct that type of arrest and arresting them in that manner. There is a lot of case law on it, and those type of videos then can be used by your attorney to charge or go after that immigration officer who's wrongfully detaining the individual.
I know it's a scary video to see, right? It's disturbing. In my opinion, part of the administration's tactic in all the communities that are being targeted is to place communities in fear, right? So that we'll be quiet, we won't push back, we'll let them do whatever they want. And this is one way that they do it, right? There's policies within ICE and that govern their agents. They're not supposed to use, for example, chokeholds. They're not supposed to use certain pressure positions when they have you on the ground that might interfere with your breathing, right? But they're doing all that. And so what Brother Mansour said is important. If you witness someone doing, or an agent conducting anything that appears to be even unprofessional, right? Especially if it starts appearing to be police brutality, you have every right in public spaces to take out your phone and document it. The phones have really brought a lot of light onto the bad behavior of law enforcement, which they denied forever, right? But now they can't deny it anymore. So you have a right to do that, and you should if you feel like things are getting out of hand. I do want to say one thing about our masajid. And this applies to your businesses that may be open to the public. Yes, they're open to the public. They can come walking in. They've not violated any law at that point. They can try to look for somebody. They can try to ask questions, right? These are our massages are open to the public, and so there is this license for them to enter. Anyone can enter, right? But we also have the right to revoke that permission, right? And so you have every right, if law enforcement's coming in to conduct an investigation, unless they have a warrant, right? Or if you've called them for assistance, of course, but unless they have, court documents allowing them to enter, you can withdraw that consent and ask them to leave, right? Because this is still, our space, and you can exclude law enforcement, especially if you feel like that they're interfering with what's going on inside the masjid.
There was a question from the brother. Yes, yes. When it comes to civil rights discrimination, CAIR is here to provide that service. We also have a large network of attorneys that like to, if it's outside of our scope, we can make those referrals, and it may not be pro bono, but at least it's someone that, is a supporter of CAIR, and then we can make that referral. But our work is strictly civil rights discrimination. And obviously, like, if you don't know the difference, just come to our office, report it to us, and then we can make that determination. So the question is, it's a major event like Friday, masjid is packed, and ICE has closed off the property. Surrounded for what purpose? For investigations. Okay, I'm curious to know if there's any precedent for something like that, but sure. I mean, this is a real anxiety for the community, I suppose.
So sorry, if it's investigation based, right, at that point, you want to make sure you as a member of the board are specifically telling them that, hey, we aren't going to answer any of your questions. We're remaining silent. We would like our attorneys to be present during any of your investigation. You want to see if they're stating that they have a warrant, then you want to see that warrant. But again, you want to get your attorney here present. If it's just a Friday Jummah prayer and they've come in, it's like Brother John said, you can always at that point refuse entry or revoke their entry and ask them to leave, and ask them politely, but tell them that, hey, this is a private space for private prayers on Friday. We're asking you to leave,
One thing from a disaster sort of response is a general recommendation, and we really have to talk about this in detail, is if there's an announcement to be made, a recommendation would be to come back inside the masjid where there are more safeties for the community, because once they leave the premises, then the masjid cannot act on behalf of the community members.
So it's a shame we have to answer this question, right? Because there are real fears. There have been several incidents where ICE may have been staging nearby to go into, a business or something unrelated to the masjid, where we've had calls with people saying, "Oh, we think this is about to happen." So I mean, there is fear in the community, and it's justifiable for what we see on TV. Alhamdulillah, so far, at least I don't know of any masjid yet in the United States that's been surrounded and, handled that way. There have been cases before where there was a legitimate law enforcement investigation and they got a search warrant and they came in and got documents and whatnot. But if we get to the situation where they are surrounding one of our religious institutions, one of our places of worship, we're all over that. We need to know immediately. We need to make sure that we will respond to that. We'll talk to the agents. You get the agent's card. You need to have people who are trained up, who know what to do. And it's nothing complicated, but they just know what the rights are, where the lines are, that we can tell them to leave. And if they don't leave, they're trespassing at that point, right? Yeah, call the police on ICE if they're trespassing. We have to document all these things as well, so using your phones and whatnot. But if this happens, we will be here, right? We don't want to live in fear of these things happening. I know there was another incident once when we got a call because there were some drones flying around. People were worried, hey, are we being spied on, right? It's a shame that we have to have these fears, but the government has acted in such a way, and it's not just this administration. I mean, it's been coming, ever since, October 7th, and then the genocide, and then all of the protesting. The government has really been aggressive in many communities, and so the best thing to do is be prepared. Is to always have someone on the grounds that knows what to do, or to have something, a flyer somewhere that says, hey, these are the steps we'll take. But the main thing to do is not panic, not run, to be professional, and just let them know, unless you have a search warrant, you're not coming in here. And then you get a hold of us, and we can figure out what to do next.
Another topic of discussion that we're happy to have is we recommend every masjid to work with the sheriff's department for active shooter training as well, because that's a concern. I know there was a question on the sister side. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, if I can just add one more thing. So over the past year, long time ago, ICE used to consider places of worship protected areas. So they wouldn't do these kind of, attacks on masjids, especially on Jummah prayers, because they know that that's a time when everybody comes into the masjid. But now they've retracted from that policy. So we're seeing there is a lot of litigation on that, and there's the Quakers congregation that's actually fighting back on this particular policy, and then them trying to enforce against protected areas. ICE leadership, based off of that litigation, has come back and said that they're going to make case-by-case determinations before they come into places of worship, and then they're going to consult their actual Office of Chief Counsel before they try to do something of this nature. Doesn't mean that they're going to follow those rules, but that's kind of what's happening. To Brother John's point, it's being ready at that point to know how to fight back, right? The Quakers congregation is a great example. Fight back when you need to fight back, right? Where they're crossing the lines, then you need to be able to litigate that issue at some point. One other additional thing is, here in Texas we have gates, we have different devices that can be utilized on those gates. So you can use technology against the government. You can create LPRs, which are license plate readers, only for your community members, and then ones that are not your community members be alerted to a specific person so you know who is coming on premise.
The question on the sister side? Wait, sorry, we can't hear you. So the question is that if you are, or someone you know, picked up by ICE, is there a way to address the injustice or change the system? Am I hearing that correctly? So I'll begin by answering the question. Is government advocacy is not just CAIR's job. It's everyone's job here. There's only so much my office and we can do, but every single one of you can proactively. One of the tendencies of our community is we react only when there's a disaster. But the opposition, those people on the other side of the political spectrum, the Islamophobes, I tell you, every single elected official from the federal level all the way down to the local level has a babysitter from the opposition. And so it's time for our community to get this foundational training on how to engage with elected officials. I'll give you an example. Today we had a meeting with City Council. And time again, we brought up ICE.